Amazing. The objectives are to understand COVID-19 fatigue, right? We're all feeling this fatigue, and parent self-awareness, identify ways to practice regulation and validation with your children, and recognize how to provide ongoing support and problem solving throughout this ongoing crisis. So I just want to start off with the fact that, and really bring light to the fact that you are the expert on your children and your family. No one knows your children or your family better than you. I just kind of come into this with a mental health lens. So although I did study and am a clinician on behavior, I don't know your children like you do. So I hope this is helpful for everyone. So the steps aimed in supporting children. So today I'm going to talk about 3 different parts. Part 1 is going to be parental emotional awareness, right? It's important to validate your own feelings. Madeline is going to talk about self-care, self-compassion, and burnout. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about being mindful about of our implicit messages. Part 2 will be about emotional regulation and validation, understanding your child's behavior patterns, validating their feelings and emotions, and ways to develop trust and become a safe resource. And part 3 is going to be about support and problem solving. I always say practice calm curiosity, meet your child where they're at, and then finally co-develop your own narrative with your child through this ongoing pandemic, right? We don't have time for this daily, but practice and reflect as often as you possibly can. So part 1, parental emotional awareness. I love this quote, right? Self-care is about giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you, right? It's so important to put on your own face mask before you can put it on others. It's important first to understand the stress response system and how it's affecting, how COVID-19 is affecting our stress response system, right? I mentioned my thesis. There's kind of a spectrum for stress, right? Positive stress is brief and increased rate. An example of positive stress is like a test or a presentation. Tolerable stress is serious but temporary stress responses, right? It's buffered by supportive relationships. An example for tolerable stress is like a natural disaster, changing schools, maybe divorce or death, but it becomes toxic when it's prolonged. It's a prolonged activation of your stress response system, and alongside with the absence of protective relationships. So really quickly to understand COVID-19 and fatigue, before Madeline jumps in and talks about burnout and self-compassion, is it's important to be mindful of the fact that the stress response system is a survival mechanism, right? We're not meant to be in this prolonged state of activated stress response, right? Right down at the bottom right here is, this is happy, calm, regulated. But when things happen, we go into this fight or flight and then freeze. And we've all kind of heard of this fight, flight, or freeze, but this gives a really good example, right? As we go into this fight, flight, or freeze, dysregulation increases. And I'll talk more about regulation, dysregulation, co-regulation, and self-regulation later on. But it's important to know that we're not meant to be in this heightened stress response state for so long, right? And we begin to feel exhausted and anxious because our bodies crave homeostasis, right? Our bodies crave to be normal, to be down here in this regular, this green, this joyful in the present moment where you're mindful and you're learning, right? We're not meant to be up here where we just feel disassociated, numb, depressed. We have this sense of hopelessness, right? Because there's this pervasive permanence to this. So that's a bit about COVID fatigue. I am going to stop my share and hand over the reins to the wonderful Madeline Reynolds. Take it away.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to speak to you guys tonight on my absolutely most favorite topic. Anybody who has ever flown on an airplane has heard the whole spiel about if the oxygen masks drop, put your own on before you help the person next to you. And so I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about how you might put your own oxygen mask on, because parents want to do whatever they can to help their kids, but that's not going to work out well if we are passed out from no oxygen. So some of the reasons why you might be burnt out right now, and I know Megan's talked about this and we'll talk more about it, but we have so much going on and there is no context for this. We have kids, we have homes to take care of, we have jobs, and all these things are being done in different ways than they were in the past. We're in this virtual world, like right here. We wouldn't have been doing this a year ago. We would have been in person, right? The pandemic fears that we all have, and the collective grief that I think everybody's experiencing, even if they're not aware that they're experiencing it. So we might all be a little bit burned out, and perhaps we are. Burnout looks a lot like depression. It could be like, you have a lack of enthusiasm, you're really fatigued, you just feel tired all the time, you are kind of disenchanted with life. Every day feels like this day before, nothing feels different, and it just kind of is this low level of What's different between burnout and depression, though, is that depression tends to have some somatic symptoms, some body-related symptoms. So if we're depressed, we are most likely going to have either trouble eating enough or eating too much. If we're depressed, we also are probably going to have problems with sleep. Same thing, not sleeping enough or sleeping too much. And that's how we can tell the difference. But if it goes on and we're just feeling this malaise and we don't even have any days where we feel like we're enjoying the things that we have previously enjoyed, that's time to look at it closely and say, okay, is this depression? And I should talk to a mental health professional. We're seeing a lot more depression during the pandemic, but again, I think that a lot of what's happening with all of us is just this COVID malaise where we're just all feeling all the time. That's not a clinical term, but you know what I mean. So my research is on something that we have really been learning a lot about, self-compassion. And what we do know is that as self-compassion goes up, burnout goes down. And that's not just true for mental health professionals, that's true for everybody across the board. And this is true for kids too. We're starting to do a lot more work with kids now and self-compassion. So let me tell you what that means, because there's a lot of misconception about that. Self-compassion is different than self-esteem. Self-compassion is self-oriented, whereas self-esteem is other-oriented. What other people think about us influences our self-esteem. What we tell ourselves influences our self-compassion. So that's a big difference. Self-compassion is made up of 3 components. One is common humanity, and the next one, self-kindness, and the third one is mindfulness. Mindfulness, when we talk about self-compassion, is a little bit different. You hear the word mindfulness everywhere you go now, and it's everywhere. and it's used with different definitions. So I think it's important for us to always define it in the situation that we're talking about. So let me explain that to you. And then I'll just give you a quick technique that you can all use, one that helps me when I'm forgetting to be self-compassionate, that just helps bring me back to that compassionate stance. So the first thing that I mentioned, common humanity, that just means that we're all in the soup together. Like when I talk about collective grief in COVID, we're all in it together, and what happens to me influences what happens to other people. Nobody's alone in any of this. And that helps us to feel better. It can help us to feel, it normalizes, like, okay, other people are feeling like this too. I went today to get my teeth cleaned. It was pretty exciting. First time in 11 months. Like, I was like, oh my gosh. But anyway, I went to get that done, and the hygienist was talking to me. She's like, I forget everything. I can't remember anything. And I was like, everybody's kind of feeling that way because we don't have routines that we're familiar with. We don't have context in which to put things. And, she just said, oh, you've made my day. It makes me feel so much better just to know that people are feeling that way, that it's not just me. Self-kindness is when we say to ourselves, it can be self-care and it can be all the luxurious things that we might do for ourselves. But really what self-kindness is in this context is being able to notice and say to ourselves, ow, this is really hard. I mean, this is really hard. All the things that are going on with our families and our kids and, trying to keep everybody safe is really hard. So I think it's really important that we own that and that we notice that and that we give ourselves that moment of how. And it might not just be about pandemic. It might just be like a rough day where you get home and the kids are screaming and yelling and doing their kid thing and it's like too much. Then, step inside your bathroom and just say, this is hard. And that's self-kindness. And then the final one is, the final part of self-compassion is mindfulness. And mindfulness in this case really means stay in the present moment. We get a lot of anxiety when we're going into the past and going, oh, I wish I did this. If only I did that. Why did I do that? And then we also get anxiety when we go into the future and go, oh my gosh, what if? If we can just stay in this moment, which is actually the only moment we have, today's the only day that we have, we can feel better. We can feel like, okay, I can do today. I can't change the past. I'd love to, but I can't. And I don't know about the future. That's an imagined future. Hopefully it comes. Hopefully it's what we want it to be, but we don't know. But we do know about right now. And so I think that there's a lot of ability to calm ourselves when we remind ourselves of that. So the last thing I said that I would give you a technique that you could use, and it's the most simple technique, and it goes back to our own childhood. And perhaps you do this with your own children, or perhaps you can remember parents doing it with you, but it's just cupping your own face. And I invite you to do that right now. Just put your hands there. What does that feel like? Maybe take a little breath. So that's all. That's all you have to do to bring yourself back to a place where you felt loved and safe and calm. So that's all I have for you right now, unless anybody has questions. Okay, I'll give it back to Megan.
Madeline.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, good night.
Go eat something.
I will.
So let's pick up where we left off. How's everyone feeling about that portion? So a big part of this parental awareness, right, is managing stress. Like Madeline said, it's important. Self-compassion is so important, right? Even if you go to the top clinical psychologist, there's no playbook for this pandemic, right? There's no, it's unprecedented. I know that word is thrown around a lot nowadays, but you need to be able to give yourself a break. You know, part of self-care is being mindful of what and when you read and watch certain things, right? Self-care is so essential, right? Find things that refuel you throughout the day. At the end of the day, when you find yourself just completely drained, you know, figure out a way for the next day to, you know, fit something in that you know refuels you, right? Stay connected with your support networks. Connection is, you know, one of the most important things when mitigating the health consequences of toxic stress, right, or any kind of stress. You saw the level between tolerable and toxic is having that support network. So staying connected and not isolating yourself is so important when managing stress. And then, like Madeline said, accept your feelings, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity with what we're going through right now. So it's so important to kind of sit with those feelings, whether it be uncomfortable feelings, you know, of anxiousness or depression, just saying, hey, this really sucks, and to sit with that. Has anyone seen this mindful picture? I love this, mindful versus mindful, like enjoying the moment. I recently saw a meme where everyone was taking pictures, and there's this one older woman who had who just was sitting there and watching it, and I just thought it was such a great mindful moment, right? She was living in the moment as opposed to on her phone taking pictures and, you know, figuring out what was going on around her. So social emotional learning and COVID, right? A part and critical part of social emotional learning includes relationship skills and social awareness. It's a process which children and adults understand and manage their emotions as well as feel and show empathy to others, right? So with masks, we need to be overly theatrical with our tone and our voice while wearing a mask, right? Kids don't know as much like what your emotion is behind that mask. When in the home or in a mask-free area, be sure to connect, right? If you are on your phone or if you're in front of a computer, and they're, you know, upset about something and you don't look up and you're not connecting with them, they don't see your affect, they don't see your face, they don't see your emotion. And that's so important for their social emotional growth, right? I have, so the next bullet point is adults who have higher social emotional intelligence will be more aware of their child's affective messages and communication, because kids can't always tell you how they're feeling, right? But if you have a better idea of how you're emotionally feeling, if you have higher emotional intelligence, you're going to be more in tune or attune with your kiddos' messages and communication. So, quick question, if all these had a numbered 1 through 10, who can tell me which of these kiddos with the mask is smiling, is happy? Which can tell me who's upset, right? So it's a really good example of the fact that masks are covering up 50% of your face, and that's where we learn social emotional cues, right? That's where we get social emotional skills. And so it's important to be mindful of that when you're working with your kids, right? When they're in a mask-free zone, make sure to connect, smile, frown, show them your emotions. So the visual cliff and COVID-19, I thought this was a great example. Infants move across a glass-covered table with checkered pattern to create the perspective of a cliff. Most infants will cross if a caregiver posed with a happy expression. None crossed with a worried or fearful expression. So this is a psychological experiment done with babies, I think 12 months and older. And it's important to be mindful, like this visual cliff, if this visual cliff and is an example of what COVID is right now, right? Say you just got done watching the news and you look shocked. Your kids are like, what's wrong? Oh, everything's right. And you're really upset. Do you think they're going to believe you? Right? I use the example of, say you are sending your kiddos off to school, you drop them off, and you look like a deer in the headlights. Do you think they're going to want to get out of the car and go to school? Right? This is an example like of this visual cliff, right? They need to trust you that everything is safe. That glass is there for them. So I apologize. Questions so far on part 1? Any? No? Okay. I'm going to go on then. What can I get a time? Okay, 7:27. Okay, we're doing good on time. So, part 2, emotional regulation and validation. This is by far my favorite quote, right? When little people are overwhelmed with big emotions, it's our job to share our calm and not join their chaos, right? I'm going to quickly talk about regulation. I'm not exactly sure how many people know what regulation is and the difference between co-regulation and self-regulation, but co-regulation is really defined as the warm and responsive interactions that provide support, coaching, modeling to children to understand, express, and modulate their thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. Self-regulation, according to Albert Bandura, who is a leading expert in self-efficacy, self-regulation is your ability to monitor your own behavior, right? And the things that influence your own behavior, and to react to your own behavior. So in co-regulation, as children are still learning to self-regulate, they look to their parents and teachers to help them with regulation. So during this pandemic, it's important to communicate, to solve problems together, and to present with optimism. Present with that optimism, like they're going to school. You may not know what's going to happen that day, but if you present with optimism, with smiles, they need that co-regulation, right? So ask yourself, like, am I co-escalating or am I co-regulating right now? Self-regulation is hard. It's hard even for adults. So teaching self-regulation to children early and practicing regularly is important for social emotional development. I put zones of regulation on here, and I'm actually going to jump right into it real quick and briefly touch upon it because it is my favorite. It's super easy. It's a great concept. And like I said, yeah, it's just easy for kids to understand. This is a little PowerPoint I created off of some other resources, but the zones of regulation is a really simple concept, right? It's like red light, green light, but with signs, right? The it's to describe your emotional alertness and both your mind and your body, right? So green means you're good to go, right? You're ready to learn. Like Madeline had said, you're in a mindful space, right? You're calm, you're happy, you're focused. Blue is you're just running slowly, right? When you wake up, you may be in the blue zone, right? You don't want to get out of bed. And you know, or when you're sick, you could be in the blue zone. Yellow is a little loss of control. So when you're defining emotions, like yellow is just a little bit of loss of control, whereas red is a big loss of control. Yellow, you just have to slow down to get the green, whereas red, you have to stop and identify the emotions, right? And then, do one of the tools to slow down. So I love this visual because it really shows you like how you're feeling and how your body feels, right? How your mind feels and how your body feels. So with COVID going on, right? I think it's important to reassess the patterns in behavior, your child's regulation, right? I always tell people about the 3 uncontrollable controllables, right? There's sleep, right? We can't control sleep. We can go to bed at 10 o'clock every night, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go to sleep. You can put your child to bed at a certain time. It doesn't mean they're going to go to sleep or even stay asleep. But we all get grumpy, right? If you don't get a full night's rest. Nutrition, right? It's so important. We hear the term hangry. You get angry. I know I do if you're hungry. And then movement. Movement is so important. These are 3 things that our bodies need. They need them. If we don't, fill them, we're going to be more dysregulated. Just like that fight, flight, or freeze. The lack of sleep, lack of nutrition, and lack of movement causes dysregulation to increase. So I have these pictures here, right? When we've got a baby, parents get really good at knowing which cry is the sleep cry or the hungry cry or the need to get up and go for a walk cry or whatnot, walk around or move around, right? But when kids get older and they're able to use their words, we forget that sometimes they don't know how to say, I'm really hungry right now, or I didn't sleep last night, They didn't say, oh, I only got the 6 hours. I know I need an 8 to be more productive. So I think it's important to reassess patterns and regulation, especially now, right? And so another part of this this section was to validate, right? So I practice reframing our words, or I say practice reframe our words, right? For both our child and with yourself, right? Madeline talked about the self-compassion aspect. Give your child or even your friends space to share. If you reframe your words, instead of saying be quiet, can you use a softer voice? Or, stop crying. It's okay to cry. You're validating their feelings. You okay? Or how are you feeling right now? So this try area gives them space. Gives them space to be, to talk, right? Madeline talked about, this collective grief that we're all feeling, and this gives you space to kind of say, hey, maybe I do need to talk about this. Maybe I do need a break. I know I can do hard things, right? Here's some examples of some empathetic responses. Hearing people talk about getting sick and dying must be scary. I can tell you're disappointed that things with school aren't the way they were before. That must be really frustrating. It's hard to stay focused on school when you don't have a teacher to help you like you used to, or one of the hardest parts is not knowing how long this is going to last. So being more empathetic with your responses, right? The calm curiosity. So any questions for the second part? I am kind of zooming through. No? Okay. Part 3, support and problem solving, right? Something that I work on often and talk about often is meeting children where they're at, right? All children are unique individuals. Things that work for one child, may not even work for a twin sibling, right? You've got to try new things and try new things for yourself, right? Things that helped refuel you 6 months ago, 12 months ago, may not refill you now, right? And then children will fill in the details with their imagination. I think this is important, to talk to them, to figure out what they hear, from their friends, what they hear from you through the walls, through, what they see, because they will fill in the details. They will create their own narrative if you don't create the narrative with them. A really good example, I used this earlier I've mentioned this earlier, is cable came out in the 80s, and two really funny comedians were talking about getting cable the next day. They were telling the story of when they were very young and they were getting cable, and they were like, what is it going to look like? Is it going to be this big thing that comes down the hallway, and what is it going to be? And kids will fill in their own details, right? They don't know what they don't know. I've worked with a few kids who didn't know what it looked like outside. Their parents kept them in, everyone, during the beginning part of quarantine. And they're like, are there green people walking around outside? But yeah, I just think it's important to understand that kids can't conceptualize things like we can, and help them create that narrative. So in an amazing presentation from the U of R, it was 4 parents, kind of supporting parents going into the new COVID school year. And I thought that this was really important. About behavioral responses, right? Observe, note the behavior, and then normalize, try not to penalize. So that first example of the flight, fight, or freeze, these are examples, right, that are going on right now. Withdrawing, avoiding others, hiding or wandering, and just becoming disengaged. Fighting, right? Acting out, acting silly, being hyperactive, arguing. That freeze, who cares, right? That numbness, that disconnection, or even refusing to answer, right? These are all examples of that stress response. Attention-seeking behavior is often connection-seeking behavior, right? They're not having that connection they had with their friends before, or as deep of connection as they may have had with you, right? Because not only are you a parent right now, one of the toughest roles in the world, you're also, part-time teacher and whatever other profession. So it's important to be mindful of the fact that they may be seeking a connection. This doing okay. So they're tolerating school, right? Socializing from a distance, largely engaged and participating, right? Those are things that they may not need help. But those others they may just be in that stress response, right? So some helping factors. Internal helping factors, right? Staying optimistic. I mentioned this earlier. Positive attention. I see you during your homework without me asking. validating feelings, reframing negative thoughts to positive ones, and zones of regulation. I love this because it really empowers them to self-regulate. I've seen kiddos that I used to work with who just are now like, I'm using this skill, I'm using my mindfulness tools. External helping factors, right? Structure, making sure you post a schedule, or even making, getting the kids up in a daily routine on days that they don't have in-person school, but have Zoom school, right? Masks are so important. It's important. They're so important for safety, but comfort over fashion, right? I talked about dysregulation earlier. Masks can cause dysregulation, right? If they're not comfortable or if you can't breathe, kids are just going to touch their face more, which means that they're not as safe, right? So many parents are throwing on cute, fashionable masks and they're not comfortable or they can't breathe, right? That's just going to cause more behavioral problems, not less. And then I talked a little bit about this earlier, but movement, right? Alternate work and play. A really good tip that I saw on that webinar from the U of R was get a buddy parent, right? A parent that that may be in the same class as your child. But right now, like Madeline said, we're all forgetting things, right? We've got that COVID brain. And if you get a buddy parent and you text each other when important things are, back to school night or whatever, it's helpful, right? And then if not, I think it's important to remember to ask for help, right? That's the most important thing. We're all going through this pandemic together, and we need each other. So,
Megan?
any questions? Yes.
Yeah, we actually do have a question. Someone wanted to know, how should we best respond when a child cries that they just want the world to go back to normal?
Yeah. In that situation, you have to sit with it, right? It's that uncomfortable feeling. Like I mentioned before, being able to sit with our own feelings, doing that co-regulation, sitting with them through that feeling, right? The world's not going to go back to normal, at least not to the normal that we knew. So we have to find a way to kind of be uncomfortable with this new normal, right? There's no way to calm anyone down, right? There's no way, there's no real answer to that. But being able to sit with it is the first step in kind of getting through it and growing through it, right? Any other questions? Did I zoom through everything? I do have a little activity if you wanted to do one. We don't have to, but I think checking in with yourself is really important, right? Madeline mentioned it, I mentioned it, putting on your face mask first. It's so much easier said than done, but finding time to check in with yourself, right? How are you feeling today? Really, how are you feeling, like physically and mentally? Checking in on, oh, that didn't feel good, right? Being mindful of not only when the kiddo is, the behaviors are dysregulated, but yourself, like, oh, that's not me. I don't normally do that. What just happened, right? Checking in with yourself. What's taking up the most of your headspace right now? Asking yourself, what's taking up that space? What can I do tomorrow for it to take up less space, right? Ask yourself, how have you been sleeping? I track my sleep regularly. A really good example is one of the administrators for one of the schools that I support. She put a Fitbit on her son and found out that every morning when her and her husband woke up and they turned on the news, he woke up. He would go back to sleep, but he woke up during that time. And she had no idea, right? So there's different kinds of trackers to find out, you know, they have kid Fitbits now, right? And be mindful of the fact that, you know, maybe you're a little loud in the morning, or if you wake them up, if their siblings, right, are loud, that wakes them up, that could cause dysregulation throughout the day. That causes one of those, you know, essential body needs to be disrupted. Ask yourself, what have you been doing for exercise? I love Brene Brown. She goes on walks and listens to podcasts. You know, making sure that you are checking in with your own body, right? Movement is an important part of survival. Our bodies need that. And then also checking in. Some of my adult clients, I'll talk about, you know, not only doing a to-do list at the end of the night or, you know, before bed, but doing a ta-da list, right? Ta-da, I accomplished this, right? That's that self-compassion part that, you know, is so needed, right? Or even making a ta-da, I want to do this ta-da tomorrow, you know? What's something you can do that would be good for you? Maybe over the weekend, you know? You can write it down, you can think about it. What's something you're looking forward to in the next few days? And then what are you grateful for? I made a little sign, I put it outside my door of all the things I'm thankful for. I was going to do one every day for the month of November, but I just, you know, couldn't wait. So I decorated a pumpkin, not an actual pumpkin, but it's like a pumpkin sign. Anyways, I hope everyone got at least one piece of information that was helpful this evening. Jewish Family Service of Rochester is here to support you. If you have any questions, please let me know. There's Madeline's information as well. And yeah, I hope everyone practices some self-compassion this evening.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you so much. This was super helpful.
I'm gonna go write my to-do
Are there
list.
any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.